Hello, I'm Robert Foote, part of a research team from the University of North Dakota in the United States. We have authored the low-cost ICS network scanning for vulnerability prevention. To put this into context, I actually work at a generation and transmission utility dealing with network security, and I felt this would be a good way of having people understand the basics that get to secure networks. Managing of SCADA and industrial control systems is ever evolving. Routable protocols and remote access introduce vulnerabilities, potential attack vectors, and mitigation requirements that weren't always present in the older ICS environments. There's been an exponential expansion of interconnectedness amongst all of the devices out there. It's ever longing desire to have everything connected so that there's remote access out to substations or other sites. That way there it can minimize manpower to travel, and with that brings new vulnerabilities. Globally applicable recommendations in Framework for Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity, or FICIC, is published by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. While NIST is a United States-based place, it is actually a very applicable set of best practices that can be applied globally. There's many methods and tools to assess networks out there, and we'll discuss some of these in this presentation. ICS security seems obvious, but it's not typically followed through with. Why is it so overwhelming? Or where to start? Those are some of those questions that maybe smaller companies aren't ready to answer yet because they just don't know where to begin, and I'm hoping that this will help with that. This is a suggestion for low-cost network assessment and scanning to improve vulnerability prevention. Operational technology security. So many of those older devices were a set and forget type of device. Networks were set up, they were very old and in the ways of protocols and connectedness, and they tend to get left out there and being used for years. They have default internet connections on these newer network-capable devices, which could potentially pose a problem when we substitute these older devices with new. If there is network connectivity, especially to the internet, some of these default connections may try to beacon out to, say, network time, update server, different kinds of things if we're not aware of that, which could create some vulnerabilities. ICS protocols in general that are run in these networks typically are a little less secure than some other more secure protocols, as well as they are well known. They've been out there for a long time, so malicious actors have had more time to also understand how they work and how to manipulate them. Operational technology devices and protocols on the internet, or internet-facing devices, can be discovered and are monitored by Shodan. Shodan is a web crawler, if you will, that actually can find a lot of these protocols that are related to industrial control systems and manage those. You can actually become a paid subscriber to Shodan and actually monitor your own devices if so be it. However, there is a vulnerability graph that shows all around the world what types of devices are facing the internet, and it's a little uneasy to see this. The SANS Institute in the US did a cybersecurity survey. There was an over 22% increase in multiple malicious incidents reported in ICS environments between 2017 and 2019. So with that said, I don't know the numbers from 2019 to now. However, I'd imagine they're probably a little bit exponential as we see more and more devices connected to the internet, that interconnectedness I mentioned. Operational technology networks typically used in public utilities. This is where safety and reliability are really required, but that's the places that sometimes don't get the most attention for safety as far as network security. It only makes sense to assess, monitor, and prevent vulnerabilities in these types of networks. And also we'll mention how a layered approach allows for a schedule and budget flexibility as you go into these assessments. Some related work to our research. There was a number of ICS or SCADA-specific applications, tools, and other things available out there commercially. You can buy them. Some of them are more specific for different types of devices or networks. But another one that's a different tool that's pretty much the most expensive but most comprehensive is a Security, Information, and Event Management, or SIEM. This is a system that would monitor all of your network traffic and understand what is common and what is normal versus what is an anomaly and alerts on that. No matter what type of application or tool is used, however, you need to have that basic knowledge of your devices, protocols, and whatever else is in your networks ahead of time so you know what you're going to be dealing with. And also management of some of these tools and the continuous monitoring can be a little complex. So there's something to consider if you need personnel or experience to manage these tools. For new vulnerability prevention initiatives, cost and the setup time may be limiting factors for some of these smaller utilities. We do compare in a table some of these tools that are provided in my research. And it also found in all of our research, there's a common theme based on the fact that a layered approach is the best, where you start small and you build upon that. To have a layered approach helps to mitigate vulnerabilities better. So in our methods here, the start is baseline documentation. Before you can implement anything security related, you need to understand your network. NIST recommends defining, inventorying, and categorizing applications, devices, and networks that you deal with. This whole documentation process is called a baseline. You basically can also create some network diagrams showing the connections between devices. Serial, Ethernet, dial-up, anything that can be connected to. And this exercise would identify all your communication paths and potential points of access into your network that you may know about or maybe you don't understand until you document them. It's important to also determine who should have and who does have network access in your organization. There needs to be a balance between business needs of access and the appropriate protections to keep people and unwanted processes out so that there's a balance there. Doing all of this, you are on your way to NIST FICIC functions for identify, protect, and detect. Next, ports and services discovery is a basic way to understand what vulnerabilities you have related to these ports and these services. If you know what needs to be used in your ICS network, what ports need to be open, what services must be used for proper communication and function, that should be documented. Information technology tools, IT tools that could be used typically aren't recommended to find ports and services because they are based on Simple Network Management Protocol, or SNMP. They don't play so well with IT or OT devices. The goal here in the step would be basically discovering open ports and services so unneeded ones then can be turned off or blocked using other security layers. You only want what you need active. The non-essential ports or services are possible targets for malicious use. So all devices from your baseline inventory, the devices that you saw in your physical looks and what you documented for baseline in the previous step, now need to have your ports and services listed near them, the things that need to be utilized for proper function. Here we get into the heart of the research, which is the network scanning. We decided to use an open source tool or a free tool called Nmap. Many of you may have heard of this already. It's pretty standard. Using tested settings, it proves to be pretty safe in an ICS network. So, and it also can be ran in an active network. However, if you're running SCADA, testing first is recommended. Each scan can be saved and viewed in the included graphical user interface of Nmap, and it makes it nice and easy so you can save the scans and later again go look at what devices and what ports and services were discovered and compare them to your baseline documentation. These scans only discover or verify assets that are connected via Ethernet, though, in the network. And you'd use this whole function to validate, as I mentioned, the previous baseline documentation to understand what you found matches what you physically saw or think you have in your network. And then you can correct any discrepancies. So scanning also identifies the ports and services previously mentioned. So you can see what actually is running, what ports are open, what services are running in your network at the time. This then is compared to what should be in your network that you documented prior, and then you understand what is running, and you can then take steps to reduce your footprint, your exposure, by turning off some unneeded services. The limitations for Nmap, though, include the fact that it does not find serial devices, it does not work with dial-up, and then the scans may take a long time, possibly hours. And other times you may get false positives or missed devices based on the scan settings and arguments that we have built. They were come up with for efficiency, but it's recommended to, especially at the beginning when you're first documenting your networks, run these scans a couple times to make sure that one was not a false positive. So our methods here to identify the Nmap command arguments, we ended up setting up a small lab which consisted of a cellular gateway, remote terminal unit or RTU, an Ethernet serial port server, and a sonic wall firewall that we had. A very small network, but a good cross-section of at least the devices that I was using in the company I'm working at. There was several diagrams in our paper and our research that actually show the test information I won't get into here due to the sake of time. While we tested, however, we ran our Nmap scans, we also utilized Wireshark, that is a packet analyzer. We observed drop network packets and delays to communications in these OT devices when utilizing specific Nmap command arguments. Nmap has a wide array of commands that can be used as you ran the scan for different various reasons, some of which work better in IT environments, and we've found which command arguments work pretty well in this small OT environment. Testing us led to the specific Nmap arguments with the best combination of reliability and performance in this ICS environment. Those Nmap arguments are in the research paper. Installing firewalls. So a defense in depth method refers to layers of security for vulnerability prevention. Access to your SCADA networks or remote ICS devices should be restricted by another layer of security, such as a firewall or a security gateway. This builds upon that baseline documentation and network scanning that we've already done. That was the start of your network security. As you get that baseline documentation, you know what you have in your network, the network scans then show you the ports and services and device discovery, and you take the steps to minimize what runs on your network as far as ports and services and possibly who has access to all of these devices. This additional layer of security, such as a firewall, goes one step further. Now you can restrict your network access or communication with these unused protocols if you can't change that within your devices in your network. You can then step back to this layer and in the firewall then restrict access to those communications that may or may not be shut off in the device. The firewalls would also possibly alert on intrusions or have virus signatures built in to be able to catch any malicious code that came through as well, depending on the type of security gateway or firewall you did implement. It was proven through our research that in a firewall, a discard rule actually was more beneficial than a deny rule, which is interesting. Discard rules, or discarded packets, are simply dropped without a reply back to the malicious actor, making it unknown to them if there's any protection methods used or if they just didn't get through on that network. So it kind of takes a little more time on their part to understand what's going on if they're trying to map your network or traverse through it. A deny rule, however, seems like it'd be more effective, but all that does is it replies back, and the malicious actor actually knows something is blocking the communication, and they can basically tell that there is a firewall or something there, so they can just easily pivot to move on to another tactic. So it actually saves them time, and the attacker has the advantage there to understand the network better when you use just a strictly deny rule. It is noted here, though, that the cost of security is starting to rise now as these additional layers are added. Separated networks are important. SCADA and remote access to devices should be separated when possible. This allows for more reliability for your SCADA traffic. Of course, SCADA a lot of times is time sensitive, and it needs to be very consistent for reliable metrics through the SCADA. So having an intermingled remote access network is not ideal, because networks can only handle so much traffic. There could be packet collisions and so on. This also, separation, reduces damage done by denial of service or similar attacks. More restrictive controls can be typically placed on each of those networks related to your baseline findings from scanning. So you know what networks you have, what types of devices, so you can control who has access to what type of network and what type of services or communication can occur through them with these separated networks. You can also take your different ICS or industrial control groups and pull them apart and have specific networks for different device types, or maybe device like system functions, things like that. You can go pretty much any direction to separate networks. No matter what you do, it's more secure than a flat network where everything is accessible from one point. In addition, a data diode could be used to enforce single direction communication as needed. If you don't have a firewall that prevents communications into different networks, data diodes can help in that respect, where it'll help direct traffic through networks only in specific ways. If you wanted SCADA to come from devices out in an ICS system back to a central location, a data diode would then allow that traffic, SCADA traffic, from the devices to that central location. However, that central location cannot communicate back through that SCADA network through the data diode. Another thing to be aware of is latency and quality assurance. These are metrics that can be monitored and set if your networks can't be separated, or even if they can be separated. If you had a network that carried both SCADA and other types of remote access communication, if you're able to set some kind of quality of service metric on that, you can make sure that the SCADA traffic is at a better quality. It makes sure that it's more priority than any other communication. This could help if there was ever any attack in the network where it was focused on a specific communication protocol or service. If the quality of service metrics are set correctly, SCADA may still be prioritized over that, and you wouldn't lose SCADA as much. Some additional recommendations. So after your initial baseline and scanning, perform that again periodically, every couple years or maybe annually, to understand if there's any new devices added to the networks or any other things have changed. Always have goals to improve security or to expand your related security budgets. Trying to start out too big can be very hard to do. So this small step of just doing these network assessments and scans goes a long way to understanding then the future layers of security to accomplish and how big the budget should be. Keep device firmware or virus definitions up to date, so that way there you're staying ahead of the latest vulnerabilities. Monitor for any of end-of-life dates on devices, so they do not go unsupported. That's an issue in ICS environments where devices sometimes would last for many, many years, and very few updates were released throughout that time. As we go into these newer types of network devices, these devices may have shorter lifespans, so the companies don't support them quite as well, and as soon as they get out of date, you're not getting any more security patches, and those could be vulnerable. Also, as an option to attend network security training or stay current on best practices from either NIST or any other equivalent agency in your own country related to security best practices. In summary, don't allow the abundance of security information overwhelm you or any company. Take the first step and perform the low-cost actions of baseline documentation and network scanning that we presented here. Use Nmap in our recommended settings found in our research, as they are the most effective in the ICS environment. Try to add additional layers of security, such as a firewall. Separate your networks where possible to make it harder for malicious code to spread. Stay vigilant and monitor ICS networks periodically to minimize any vulnerabilities that may come up. And if everyone applied these low-cost principles to every network, the world would just be more secure. Parting words here, a vulnerability prevention is only as effective as the effort put toward it. Thank you for your time.